Hello friends, Siddhi Bangard this side, your friend, educator and mentor. A very good morning. So today we'll discuss India's neighborhood, a basic overview of India's neighborhood and why neighbors are important, why to actually think about them when you make your foreign policy. Foreign is supposed to be foreign, right? Something which should be very, very far off, something which is away from you. Why are we concerned about the neighborhood? All this and more we'll be talking about in this session. But briefly about me first. So I'm Siddhi Bangard and I have a cumulative experience, 3 years teaching experience. I graduated from BIT Mesra Ranchi and appeared in 4 mains and interview. I've also qualified CATSAT and other MBA exams and did my graduation, post-graduation from XLRI Jamshedpur, HR. With that, on the Unacademy platform, you get daily live classes. In fact, right now I'm running a prelims mini mock test series on the Unacademy platform, which is in the form of special classes. That means the classes are free for all. You can come and attend it. I will also share the link of the class on my Telegram group and channel. And I also posted in the comment section so you can come and attend those mini mock test series. We provide you with live tests and quizzes like we are doing right now. And also after every class, you get notes in the form of a PDF. Additionally, we provide you with structured courses. That means all our courses are in line with the syllabus, the UPSC syllabus, so that nothing goes out of the UPSC syllabus. You're not left wondering about what happened to the rest of the course. Unlimited access. So if you plan to buy a subscription for my science and technology course on the Unacademy platform, which is a capsule course for the entire year of May 2019 to May 2020, science and technology events covered in that, then with just that one subscription, you get access to more than 200 courses which are live, recorded, or upcoming on our platform. All right, that and much more. We have the top educators on our platform, including me, your favorite teacher, and we are covering almost the entire spectrum of the UPSC course, right from the prelims to the interviews. As you can see, there are courses or interview preparation, essay writing and answer writing courses. So you don't have to go anywhere else. You don't have to go to 4 different places to prepare for civil services fully. Also, that all this and much more comes at a very, very reasonable price. For a 1 year subscription is just under 45,000, which further reduces to under 40,000 if you use my code SBUS to get a 10% off. Also, all our courses for a 6 month, 12 month, and 24-month subscription have a no cost EMI. That means you won't be charged interest if you take the courses on EMI. And for a 24-month subscription or 2 year subscription, the cost further reduces to less than 30,000 a year, because your entire budget comes out to be 64,000, which is further reduced to less than 58,000. If you use my code SBUS, you get an instant 10% off, and this is the final cost. So that means less than 29,000 you pay for an entire year. So this one is more beneficial for UPSC 2021 students. So we have something for everyone here. With that, let's begin with today's session. So up till now, what have we discussed? We have discussed the introduction to foreign policy. That means what is foreign policy? We have discussed what determines the foreign policy of a nation. We have discussed the institutions that are related to foreign policy, both at an international level and at an Indian level. That was our first lecture. Then we discussed foreign policy objectives and principles and the 6 phases of foreign policy as they have evolved over the time, from beginning from 1947 till now. And in the third lecture, that was yesterday, we discussed how the foreign policy has evolved with the leadership, how our PMs, prime ministers, have influenced our foreign policy in a big way, what big developments happened during each of the prime minister's era. Now, as I told you, the next upcoming lecture would be about India's neighborhood foreign policy. It's an introductory class. So here we will be discussing a basic overview of the neighborhood, how the Indian neighborhood looks like, both in the land boundary area and the maritime boundary area. who are our neighbors, what is the difference between their GDP, our GDP, what is the Human Development Index, what are those indicators that make us similar or different. And then we'll discuss why, just simply the reason why you need to have a neighborhood policy and what India is actually doing about it. All right, so it's again a 2 lecture series. First, I'll give you a brief introduction in this lecture, and in the upcoming session, we will be discussing the neighborhood first policy, which is the flagship policy of the Modi government since 2014. And since it requires a greater detailed discussion, so it will be done in the upcoming session along with the Look East and Act East policy. All right, so let's begin. The contents for today's session are basic overview of Indian neighborhood and importance of neighbors in foreign policy. Why are they important? All right, and the neighborhood first policy, the Look East policy, or the Act East policy, as is called in the Modi government. We will be discussing all of them three in the tomorrow's session or day after tomorrow's session. I will inform you about that. We will discuss the pathways to those policies and the developments that have happened since the new government came in. As I told you that Narendra Modi's government part, what they have done on a foreign level, that I will cover in detail because a lot of developments have happened, and that is actually predominantly important for the exam. So we'll discuss that a little bit in detail, and only combining it with this session wouldn't have done proper justice to it. So with that, let's proceed. India, as we know, so I have already discussed this slide earlier, but here I would like to point out about India's geography. All right, we already know about our economy. We are fifth largest economy by nominal rates of GDP, third largest military expenditure, and largest armed force. And not just that, also a nuclear power. Do you know how many nuclear powers are there in our vicinity? We are there, China is there, and Pakistan is there. The rest of the countries which are our neighbors are non-nuclear powers. All right, and that actually has a big impact in the way they deal with us. All right, and at any point of time, if I'm not audible, please let me know. Then in the geography, India is a part of the region called South Asia. All right, and I will also tell you what the other countries that comprise of it. So China is actually part of Southeast Asia, but for the benefit of information, I will include it here right now because we are talking about India's neighbors. The area that India occupies is almost approximately 2% of the world area, and it is 3.28 million square kilometers. That means it is approximately 75% area of the Indian subcontinent. And this, my friends, becomes one of the important reasons why we exert so much pressure mentally. We don't say anything, but our predominant position in the Indian Ocean, in the Indian subcontinent, is actually always a cause of concern for our neighbors because the size is hugely different. The rest of the countries are quite smaller as compared to us, and that's why they're always fearful of Indian intentions, and that's why we have to treat very cautiously. Please keep this point marked in your head because we'll be using it as a point when we discuss it later. Now, let's move on to our today's India's land boundary neighbors. Let's do a very overview kind of comparison between all these nations. So this is our reference point, India here. We have a population of approximately 1.35 billion. So out of 7.5 billion people, 1.35 billion people reside in India. So every seventh person is basically an Indian. An economy of $3.2 trillion or $3 trillion. The only nation which has an economy larger than us here is China. And the difference is huge, almost 5 times our economy. That's $15 trillion. On the HDI index, actually, unfortunately, India is not faring as well as some of its other neighbors. As you'll see, even Sri Lanka is actually doing better than us. It is on a Human Development Index, it is at position number 71. India is at a position number 129. So we are only doing slightly better than our neighbors, which is actually not a very good example. But then the population is very different and we have huge regional diversity. So let's see, we cannot make an exact comparison. But yes, being the big powers of this region, we should set an exemplary position for ourselves, for the rest to follow, or for the rest to respect us. In fact, the statement was recently made by Jay Shankar in the Russia-India-China conference, which just happened right now post the Galwan standoff. He said that China and India are both big Asian powers, so they should behave accordingly. This is about the legislature format. What is their legislature of these respective countries are called? So in India, the legislature is called parliament. And in fact, even if it is called by any other names in the other countries, the structure is still the same. You have an upper house and you have a lower house. Just the name of the assembly differs. Now, let's just see what are the boundary areas or boundary in kilometers that are shared with the various respective nation states that I've mentioned here. All right. Who guards those boundaries from the Indian side? And the population, the GDP and the HDI rates of the various neighbors. So let's start with Afghanistan. The de jure, what does de jure means? Actually, by law, Afghanistan should be our boundary member. India considers it to be its land boundary neighbors. However, de facto position or the original position is that it is guided. The land boundary is actually guarded by the Gilgit-Baltistan Scouts, which is a Pakistani state agency. That means it's a part of the Pakistan government because the boundary with Afghanistan actually lies in Pak occupied Kashmir. And the population of Afghanistan is very, very less. It's just 32 million compared to a population of 1.35 billion. Yet, India has very, very strong relationships with Afghanistan. In fact, during Manmohan Singh's time, we became the largest aid donor to Afghanistan. Indian culture is very, very famous in Afghanistan. To Afghanistan, India is like a big brother. We are doing a lot of developmental projects with them and we try to assist them in every possible manner we can. And that is one of the part of our neighborhood policies, which I will be discussing later in this session. They have a nominal GDP of just $21 billion or $21 billion only. As you can see, a rough comparison here, only Bhutan has a lesser GDP than Afghanistan. So you can see the extent to which the war has ravaged Afghanistan, that it's a large country, it's almost the size of Pakistan, and still look at the difference in the GDP that has happened because of terrorism or foreign occupation. It gives an insight into the numbers, it gives an insight into the developmental aspects. So please observe these numbers. The GDP rates, though we say, are not a complete reflection of how the country is doing, but to a certain extent, it actually tells about the economic situation and the plight of the society. All right, on the human development indicators also, Afghanistan occupies the lowest rank. This HDI indicator rank is as of 2019. All the data is as of 2019 and the HDI ranking is out of 189 countries. And you can see we do not have much difference. We are at 129 and Afghanistan is at 170. So compared to them, we are a democracy. We have seen peace for a long, long time. We should have fared better, right? Their parliament is actually called National Assembly. Ideally, Afghanistan is actually ruled by a tribal council. All the tribal communities, they come together and then they are proportionally represented in their decision making body, which is called a National Assembly. Now let's look at the case of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the country with which we share the greatest number of or the greatest length of borders. So it is not China with which we share the greatest boundary. It is Bangladesh, 4096 kilometers. And the best part about all these things, both these nations, is the boundary is clearly demarcated. Whether it is with POK or whether it is with us, we actually know the exact kilometers of the boundary that is there. At least the boundary length is clear. As you will see, it is not clear in some of the other neighbors' cases. So Bangladesh, we have a 4096 kilometers boundary. It is manned by the Border Security Force or the BSF. If you want to remember who the BSF is, then remember Sunil Shetty from the Border movie. He was a part of the Border Security Forces. The population of Bangladesh is again very less compared to India, but sizably more, almost 5 times more than Afghanistan. but still very, very less compared to India. But they have a good GDP. It shows that years of peaceful rule, peaceful transition, not very peaceful transition of democracy, has actually brought some sort of prosperity to Bangladesh, and it's on a growth path. Its development indicators is not very far from India. It's on a 135 number position. The legislature of Bangladesh is known as Jatiya Sangsad. All right. Let's come to Bhutan. We have a 699-kilometer boundary with this royal nation just on our northern frontiers, the northeastern frontiers. It is manned by SSB or Sashastra Seema Bal. Why am I actually telling you about all these security forces? Because it is a part of the internal security aspect of India, that is a part of the GS2 main syllabus. The population is just 75.5 lakhs. It's a very, very small kingdom, nestled in the northern Himalayas, all right? Their GDP is just 2.547 billion. It's appropriate to their size, not truly appropriate, because if you consider Singapore, it has a very, very high GDP. But this kingdom nestled in the northern Himalayas is doing quite well for itself. It's a very, very friendly neighbor of India. And they have a rank actually better than Bangladesh. HDI indicators better than Bangladesh, and they also have the gross happiness index as the measurement of their growth. Their legislature is also called the parliament. Now comes China. As I told you, here the boundary is not defined. The LAC or the line of actual control is viewed differently. So 3488 or 3488 kilometers is India's perception of the line of actual control. According to China, it's approximately 2000 kilometers. And if you look at the boundary, it's approximately 4000 kilometers, right? The actual boundary, if you take the maps and considerations that were drawn previously. So there's a lot of confusion at the boundary, which actually keeps causing all these standoffs, which have flared up in the past, be it the Doklam standoff, be it the Depsang Plain standoff, be it the Chumar standoff, and be it the recent Galwan Valley standoff. It's because of the confusion at the LAC. And that's why I said to have a resolved boundary issue is a boon for any country. Now, this part is actually manned by the ITBP or the Special Frontier Force. The Indo-Tibetan Border Police mans the China border. The population of China is the only country which has a higher population than us. It's 1.4 billion, and we will overtake China by 2050. GDP, it's just incomparable. They are our wonder economic neighbors. And right now, please keep an eye on how the export bans are playing out on Chinese goods, because even just in today's newspaper, I was reading that sellers will now have to tell the origins of the supplies that they are making. So please keep an eye on all those trade relations between India and China. They might be important from the mains point of view. The Human Development Index, they are considered to be in the high Human Development Index part of the human development, and their ranking is far, far better than us, though the government is not a democracy. The pollution rates are very high, but on the all the other indicators, life expectancy, GDP per capita, they are faring really better than India. Their parliament, they don't have exactly like a parliament structure because it's a one party rule. It's called National People's Congress. All right, they just have one body in their parliament, not two separate institutions in the parliament like we do or the other nations do. They simply have a National People's Congress. So that's the difference in the legislatures. Now let's talk about Myanmar or erstwhile Burma. The boundary that we share with Burma is 1643 kilometers, fairly recognized, all right, and guarded by the Assam Rifles and the Indian Army together, all right. The population is slightly more than Afghanistan, but lesser than all the other neighbors, approximately 53 million. The GDP is approximately $66 billion, and it is fairly doing well now. Once Aung San Suu Kyi is back, the presidency is restored. So it's still a kind of a dictatorial nation. The indicators, the human development indicators are yet to pick up. So it's at a very, very poor place. It has a human development index of 145, and especially given the plight of the Rohingya Muslims. So I yesterday talked about the Bhashan Char island where the Rohingya Muslims have moved. So especially talking about their plight, it's not a very, very good signal that is coming from Myanmar that might actually balloon into a huge refugee crisis. Their parliament is called Assembly of the Union. Now, let's come to Nepal. Fairly resolved borders of approximately 1000 kilometers, 1700 kilometers. We have the boundary issues at Kalapani and Susta, one in the northern Nepal and one in the southern Nepal, and it has been the ambassador's dream. Every Indian ambassador to Nepal says that it's high time, because right now, when we want to become a superpower, we want to become a potential economic power, we want to become a potential power in the world stage, it is imperative that at least our boundary issues are resolved. So we're not wasting any more energy on that, and we can engage constructively with the rest of the world. It is also meant by the Sashastra Seema Bal, just like Bhutan. All right. The population is extremely less, far lesser than Afghanistan, also 28 million only, and their GDP is comparable to their population, that's approximately 30 billion, and their parliament is called the federal parliament. The structure is similar to Indian parliament. Most of the constitution that they have built was done with the help of Indian experts, so their constitution looks alike to like ours, and most of the structure is similar to ours only. Their HDI ranking is also very, very small. So post the Nepalian kingdom was destroyed, the monarchy was destroyed, democracy took a very, very long period of time to come in. And in that, they actually lost the race to development. So the human development indicators are very low, and Nepal fares at a rank of 147. Now let's come to our not so beloved neighbor, Pakistan. We share a huge boundary with Pakistan, comparable to the size of China and Bangladesh. It is again manned by the border security forces, right? As I told you, go and look at border. It has a population far higher than the rest of our neighbors, excluding China, approximately 212 million, and a GDP comparable to its population size, that is 282.2 billion. So the GDP, as you can see, even for the smaller neighbors, the GDP is quite high compared to their sizes. But Pakistan has really lagged far behind, and I think that is one of the reasons, as we'll go discuss later. Two brothers who started at the same time and have completely grown in a very, very different manner. In fact, recently it was doing rounds in the news that when Imran Khan, the current prime minister of Pakistan, had suggested that they will transfer money to the poor in India because Indian government was unable to take care of them. So our foreign spokesman had to say that, look, your entire GDP is equivalent to the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package that we actually gave out. So don't even compare on those terms. We gave a Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan package of 20 lakh crores, and your entire GDP is equivalent to that. So, just stop talking about giving aid to our people. We really don't need that. So that was a fitting reply, and they should actually stop giving such blasphemous statements, right? Okay. Pakistan really, really lags behind. It is just a couple of places above Afghanistan in the Human Development Index, faring even worse than Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. All right, and it's faring worse than Bangladesh is actually an indicator of how far it has fallen, because Bangladesh and Pakistan used to be two neighbors separated by the giant neighbor India. And its legislature is also called Parliament, similarly structured around the Indian lines. So you can, out of this entire discussion, what the key takeaways are. At each of these places, most of our borders have some or the other issues, all right? Our neighbors are quite smaller compared to us, except for China. And we lie almost in the same human development indicator region, apart from one or two countries who are oddly out of that sphere. And the parliamentary structure is more or less similar. That means our socio-economic development indicators are more or less similar. Our populations might be different. And what does that entail? That our approach to development, our approach to seeing our neighbors also remains similar. That means as much as the other neighbors are insecure about India's rise, India is also insecure about the neighbors going on and aligning with China or aligning with other powers to actually have hard negotiation points against India. And for some time, India has actually been grappling with that issue, and we are trying to get our neighborhood back together. We are trying to get back our signatorial prominent position in the neighborhood back together. In fact, recently with the skirmishes with Nepal, China, and the rise of Pakistan, we are facing a lot of issues with our neighbors. With that, let's move on to India's maritime neighbors. So I'm sure you must have studied a lot about India's land-time neighbors, but what about India's maritime boundary neighbors? Again, let's do a small comparison here. Sri Lanka, all these maritime borders are guarded by Indian Navy, unlike different forces that guard different parts of India. All right. So Sri Lanka has a population of around 21 million, just suitable to the size of the island nation, but a huge GDP, $92 billion dollars GDP, and its human development indicators are far better than India, right? Even though they have fought a long internal civil war, they have really fared better than us. Their legislature is also known as parliament. Bangladesh also we have a maritime boundary with. Again, we have already compared their GDP with us and their HDI indicators. Now let's talk about Indonesia. Our neighbor which we also have ties going back since the non-aligned movement. A lot is similar in terms of culture, in terms of the currency. There is called rupiah, R is called rupee, and a lot in terms of the population distribution. Indonesia is the country which has the highest number of Muslims in the world, and not India or Pakistan. All right. And it's also a secular nation, and its HDI index is actually way better than India. And it also exports similar items which India exports. So please remember that thing in mind. In fact, most of the subcontinent regions, since it has similar climate, similar growth development indicators, and they are at similar level of development, they actually end up exporting the same items to the rest of the country. So there's a lot of competition amongst the India's neighbor on the export front. It has a GDP, it has a fairly good GDP compared to its size, that is approximately 1.2 trillion compared to India's 3 trillion. Its parliament is called People's Consultative Assembly. The structure remains almost similar to India's. Thailand, a country which is very small in terms of people, just 66 million people, has a GDP of 516 billion and very high human development indicators. That is, it is at a position of 77, which is far ahead of China also. And its parliament is called National Assembly. There have been some tumultuous times going on in Thailand right now, though. Myanmar, we already compared. Then comes to Maldives. Sorry, Maldives. Maldives has a very small population. Obviously, it's a speck of an island, 51 lakhs. Most of them are actually Indian immigrants. India is like big brother, big daddy, everything to them. And we keep sending them aid. Their GDP is approximately 4.825 billion, mostly comprising of tourism. All right, nothing much to export. Their legislature is called People's Majlis. Our prime ministers have actually addressed their People's Majlis, and their HDI is actually far better than India. In fact, they come in the high HDI countries. It comes in the part of the high HDI countries or high human development indicators. And Pakistan, we already know. Now, I just want to show you in detail here how our boundaries look like. Okay. So, let's just magnify this part. Can you see? Because what I want you to see here is that look at this Indian subcontinent which used to be there. Okay. And if you have any doubts, please post it in the live chat session. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I just saw the messages. I'm sorry. Okay. India occupies a very predominant position, as you can see here. The size is huge compared to its neighbor Pakistan here, Afghanistan here, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, China is here obviously. So minus China, we are actually very predominant, and that's why an entire ocean has been named after us. I actually want you to observe this size despite our whole northern frontier being occupied. And also see that when we talk about Indian subcontinent, When we talk about the previous times, before independence times, you can see the Indian subcontinent was as large as expanded to Afghanistan, including Nepal and Bhutan, right? This whole area was actually part of the Indian subcontinent. So if it was a part of Indian subcontinent, we are closely related, not just geographically, but also historically and socially. And that still reflects in the way we fight around our borders. This is the maritime border of India. You can see we share the maritime border of India with Pakistan here, the Maldives here, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia here, all right, and this is India's region. So the rest of the region in light blue is actually the region in light blue is the boundary of the other nations. For example, this is the Sri Lankan boundary, this is the Maldives boundary, this is the Pakistani boundary, this is the Myanmar's boundary, this is Bangladesh's boundary, this is Thailand's water boundary, and this is Indonesia's water boundary. The rest, which is highlighted in deep blue, is actually India's boundary in the maritime region or in the Indian Ocean region, right? Now, with that, let's move on to the next thing, which is today's discussion. So I want all of you to pay a lot of attention to this part. Okay. All right. Now, in this part, what are we saying? We are saying your neighbors are a gift of geography, period. You can't do anything about them. There's no geographical choice about it. They are just there. All right. So they are given to you. You don't have a choice. So learn to live with them is the whole motto. Now, when that happens, in fact, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh seemed to have remarked that a success of a foreign policy is actually determined by how well are we able to engage with our neighborhood. Why? Because anything that happens in the neighborhood directly impacts us, not indirectly, right? It directly impacts us. If there is a commotion going on in the neighborhood, it will impact us. So if there are problems unresolved in Pakistan, they will spill over to India. If there are problems unresolved in China, they will spill over us. For example, China and Tibet don't see eye to eye, and India often gets caught in the tornado that whatever happens there. Pakistan is not able to control its internal terrorism, and that keeps spilling over to India. Pakistan and Afghanistan are not able to solve their issues, and that issues keep spilling over to India, right? The terrorism that was happening in Sri Lanka, it kept spilling over to Tamil Nadu or our internal regions. So whatever happens in the borders, in a big way, impacts us because the geography is such that you just can't remain impacted. For example, I'll give you a very, very practical example. There are, when you go to the city area of any the main primary city area or the business district of any city, you will see the shops are very, very closely spaced. So if one shop catches fire, the entire market goes under the blaze. And that's what happened with the neighborhood also. You cannot choose your neighbors. So that means, and in fact, given India's circumstances, it's all the more true because all these neighbors were not neighbors that were, say, socially separated, like France, Germany, and other nations are there in the EU. All of those neighbors have separate cultures, separate languages, and separate customs. They are integrated in a certain way. They all belong to Europe regionally. But other than that, they had separate interests or they had separate language and separate customs. But in India, with the Indian subcontinent, the problem is that they were actually all recognized as a part of India. So they don't even have separate languages or separate customs. You can as well as go and speak Hindi in Pakistan. We as well as speak Urdu, and Urdu is a big part of actually Bollywood here. So we have that kind of commonality. So what are the problems when that happens when all these subcontinent neighbors were like brothers earlier? They have sibling rivalries, they have congenital problems. They are joined at the hip and they just can't separate, and they both feel that they don't have enough wiggle room to actually separate and engage properly, and that's what's happening in the Indian subcontinent. So since they are like brothers, they have congenital problems. They suffer from sibling rivalries, like just like the humans, they have complicated bilateral or multilateral discourses. There's so much of distrust. because of the historic baggage that they carry. For example, partition with Pakistan, you know, Nepal had been, we have never tried to annex the kingdom of Nepal or of Bhutan or of Sikkim. Nehru recognized Sikkim as an independent kingdom. We never wanted them to come in, but then Indira Gandhi had to let Sikkim in, and they happily relented. We never did the same with Bhutan or Nepal, but they still have their own fears. There's a historic baggage there that India is a huge, huge neighbor, something might happen to us. And external inducements, like what is happening in the India Nepal standoff right now. We keep warning Nepal that, don't destroy this unique relationship we have with you just on basis of Chinese inducements or Pakistani inducements that they'll provide you with something. That will not happen. They will not open their borders to you like we have done. We have done as brothers, and we have given you this unique opportunity to intermingle, which will not be given to you by others. And for Nepal also, it's we get that opportunity to talk to it in a very, very congenial format, in a very, very friendly format, which we do not have with other nations. We do not have a terrorism problem with Nepal, right? So even India shouldn't take that thing for granted. Now, the second thing about the gift of geography or the neighborly brothers are often their land and territorial issues get merged with sovereignty dimensions. Why? This is something I talked about in the second lecture on the India China border dispute. I then told that, beyond every issue or every dispute that you share with your neighbor, it's not just the boundary, it's the tip of the iceberg. The internal issue is somewhere else. There's a huge, huge distrust in each other. China has distrust in us because of the 1962 war. We have distrust in China because of the 1962 war. All right, China has distrust because of the Tibetan region that we gave the Dalai Lama political asylum, and since then China has been enraged with us. Now, so those land and territorial issues are actually not land and territorial issues as it seemed to us. They actually get merged with their sovereign issues. What do we mean by sovereignty? They say that over these certain things we have a right, we will exert our rights. So when you come to actually discuss the disputes, you are not thinking with your mind, you are not applying logic and trying to solve the problem, you're thinking with your heart. And that's why the problem gets bigger, and it becomes all the more difficult to actually resolve those problems. And that's why we say that the sovereignty dimension kicks in and makes the problems more complex, engineered with domestic politics. When the Chinese backlash happened in 1962, everybody was so shocked. Nehru was so internally shocked. Why? Because he trusted. And then domestically, people started judging his judgment on the foreign affairs. Now, that man, he couldn't take it because he was a world renowned statesman, known for his astute acumen of understanding international affairs given his exposure. And something like this happens to you, then the domestic politics completely turns against you. In fact, it very often happens, not just with China, but with Pakistan, so very often happens. Every single time, we are trying to engage with them, there are different opinions emerging from different sides of the border, right? So a part of Pakistan will say, we really don't want to engage with China, just have a war and get over with it. Let's get Kashmir and let's be done with it. Another part of Pakistan will be like, we want peace just as much as India wants it. So let's settle down this thing, right? India, people will be, why are we even talking to them? They just don't deserve any talking. Just let's get Kashmir to ourselves and just be done with this whole issue. They have bothered us enough. So there's a lot of domestic politics going on. There's a lot of emotion involved when it comes to your neighbors. And that is the reason why all the neighborhood policies have to be crafted very delicately, because any mistake you make there and it completely flares up into a war. And we are more experienced than anybody in this. We have had 4 wars already with Pakistan and one with China, right? And not just us, it is also common to the European region. See, both the world wars were fought in that entirely small European region amongst those 2 or 4 or 5 or 6 powers, right? And the whole world got involved. There were small, small issues which emerged from the emotions and the way they dealt with the issues. And then that entire region flared up, not once, but twice. And finally, we had the United Nations. So it's a similar history here. India definitely is no exception to the neighborhood policy, right? Several of its neighbors have a historical nexus. As I told you, Indian subcontinent was together, which was actually called Sindhu. That's where we get our name Bharat. Alexander recognized it as Sindhu. The entire area was considered as India. So they have coexisted as a part of whole, and now they are into different countries. So even when they try to raise those nationalism barriers, it actually creates a problem, because you cannot have those high nationalism barriers within the subcontinent, because our economy, our culture, our geography is the same. And even they're being to the colonialism of barely 200 years. So what does the statement actually mean? We were brothers, we were together, we were a part of the entire one Bharat Varsha, as we call it in the ancient times, and suddenly we are different powers. So it's just been 200 odd years when we have been recognized differently. Before that we were together. It's only the colonialists actually drew those boundaries and separated us as nations, right? So India is no exception to these neighborhood conundrums that keep happening. So both history and geography issues that happen in the neighborhood or the extended neighborhood, if you include China, are accentuated by modern day competition. This I have discussed in detail in the second India-China border dispute when I discussed about the superpower status. Every nation now wants to play a big role at the global stage. It wants to be heard, it wants to have a voice, so that it can meet its own national security interest. As the developments are happening, as the communication technology is spreading, every nation wants to have its share of the pie. So there's that huge modern day competition. And Indian neighborhood, they all being along the same lines of the socio-economic development, as I talked earlier in my lecture, they are competing for the same set of pie, and the pie doesn't get bigger. So you can understand the competition level goes up, notches higher, and that is what is happening right now. And at this point of time, the smaller countries become more and more insecure and get influenced by the bigger powers. So bigger powers actually recognize that insecurity is something which they can play with to get the smaller countries to their side. That's what China keeps doing. It keeps playing either the Sri Lankan card, or the Nepal card, or the Pakistan card with India to actually negotiate with India. These countries understand that this is what is happening. They are just using us as a bait, but then they can't do anything. They require money for their development, they require assistance for their development, and to some extent they kind of have started resenting India, so they fall into that trap. Now what exactly happens? As I told you, I asked you to keep in mind this one point, that we occupy 75% area of the Indian subcontinent. We are a far greater economic power than most of our neighbors, excepting for China. All right. And only Indonesia compares near to us, approximately $1.2 trillion economy. Other than that, how do we appear to our neighbors? So, do you know that David and Goliath story? So, for our neighbors, we are the Goliaths and they are the small Davids. It's like Lilliputians versus Gulliver's Travels, right? Gulliver. So, that's the huge difference that they see. And how do they try to balance it? By getting into agreements and treaties with other potential superpowers or other bigger powers. Like what India started doing in the second phase of its foreign policy, when it started having greater regional assertion. So you were either aligning with the USA to get your security arrangements met, or you were aligning with the Soviet power, right? That's what our neighbors are also doing. They're either aligning with India or they're either aligning with China. Now, let's come to the next part. Size, I already told you, and economic resources, I already told you. The second part. This makes our neighbors highly sensitive. So any mistake, even the smallest ones, actually get magnified and creates a huge distrust. For example, when we tried to intervene in the constitution making of Nepal, they became highly distrustful of us. They said that you're trying to influence our polity and that you are impinging on our sovereignty. When all our effort was to try, because for them it was a new exercise, we just wanted to help them out. But then India also at times appeared to be very insensitive, especially when you talk about the foreign aid that went to Kathmandu just after the Nepal earthquake. I think that's back in 2014 and 2015 when our Prime Minister first visited that place. And the way the Indian media covered the Nepal earthquake, it was considered to be very insensitive of India to have a media coverage like that. You know, we gave a lot of aid, but we made them appear like beggars. And that's not acceptable to any self-respecting country. So we have to be very mindful of those issues. And whenever such kind of issues are already there amongst the neighbors, given the kind of scenario, what is the result? The result is unresolved boundary issues, fight over water resources. You can have the Indus Water Treaty, You can have the Brahmaputra issue, about which I spoke in the India-China border disputes. Enemy, friend, unholy alliances. This comes straight from the Chanakya's theory that your enemy's enemy is your friend, like what we are doing with Afghanistan and what China is doing with Pakistan. Afghanistan is Pakistan's enemy, so we go and make friends with it. Pakistan is our enemy, so China goes and makes friends with it, right? So these unholy alliances keep coming up, which lead to political manipulations and destruction of peace. And whenever there's a destruction of peace in the neighborhood, you will have to spend most of your energies trying to flare up the flames rather than developing ahead. And thus, foreign policy is incomplete without taking boundary states on board. So, whenever certain boundary issues come up, the central government can't do much without taking the state government on board. For example, when the Bangladesh issue was resolved, Mamata Banerjee had to be taken on board for the exchange of enclaves. Similarly, whenever we have to go to Sri Lanka and resolve certain issues, we have to keep Tamil Nadu, or we have to take in the opinions and views of Tamil Nadu in place. Because it's essentially the states which will be engaging with our neighbors, the boundary states will be engaging with our neighbors, right? So there was a huge, it was because of the huge outcry in Tamil Nadu that India had to intervene for the Tamilians in Sri Lanka who are a minority there. Otherwise, we wouldn't really have intervened. We have a policy of mutual non-interference in our neighbors, but we had to. There was a lot of state pressure. So that's what happens. And finally, I would like to conclude here with what Manmohan Singh again said. The strength of our foreign policy, the success of our foreign policy depends on how well we manage our neighborhood. So never forget this line. That's the importance of the foreign policy. Now, a properly managed foreign policy will lead to maintenance of peace and focus our energy on development. What is India doing for it? India actually always believes that a stronger neighbor with a balanced outlook is a prerequisite for our own growth, right? And that's why India is trying to align with its neighbors on a lot of other things. We give economic aid, we give human resources aid, we try to help them with our opinions, with our own experiences of growing and developing as a nation. We provide them with weapons, we provide them with food grains, we export them items that they don't have. All right, but we try to support them in every possible way so that they are standing on their own feet. Because once they are economically powerful, they become socially powerful, and that's when these kind of issues, the smaller issues, won't keep flaring up, because they'll be busy in exporting and importing, they'll be busy in international trade, they won't be busy in bickering with their neighbors, right? Now, but what is the problem that India is facing in doing that? Because if I say all this, the next question that you'll ask me is, ma'am, if something like this is already happening, then why the neighborhood is not peaceful? So I'll answer your question right away. But before that, I'll take a few queries. I think there are a few queries. No, no, Lakshadweep and Maldives are different. So just go and look at the map. They're different. They're not same. Maldives is a proper independent country. All right. Lakshadweeps are a part of India. Great. Okay. Why is India not able to do that? Do you remember I told you that India and its neighbors are actually in the same growth phase? They have the same culture. They have the same environment. They have the same agricultural practices. So we end up exporting similar kind of items. Our economies run parallel. Pakistan also exports cotton. We also export cotton. All right. China also exports cotton. Okay. Bangladesh exports jute. We also export jute. So when we are exporting the same thing, then that means we actually cannot come together like the European Union. That means we cannot merge our economic interest, because our economic interests are actually at competing each other. Those who export the more get the more benefit. We might have aligned it like GCC or the Gulf Cooperation Council or the oil exporting countries, the OPEC, and decided the prices, but that's unlikely to happen, because oil as a commodity is very, very different compared to cotton and other things, because it's an agricultural product, right? So we really cannot align on that. So what are the alternatives? Since we are competing parallelly on economies, what are the other alternatives? What are the commonalities that we can find to make our borders and the neighbors in the neighborhood more peaceful? So we can create points of commonality like the hydropower. For example, India is hugely into developing hydropower both in Nepal and in Bhutan, so that they can stand on their feet, their energy needs are met, and if the energy needs are met, the developmental needs will be met, and they will climb on higher on the ladder of economic development, or sharing of human resources or skill development. India has opened its borders to its smaller neighbors to come and study here, to gain degrees, to study in the universities, to work here, just like Nepal and Bhutan have open borders. So we are doing that, and we are well recognized for it. In the entire subcontinent, we are recognized for this kind of soft power. And the second thing that we can do in our neighborhood is, see, we don't have the muscle power, we don't have the money power to splurge like China, but at least we can timely execute our projects. For example, in Nepal itself, the Arun hydropower project or the Pancheshwar dam project are lying idle right now. We haven't been able to complete those projects. So if we complete those projects on time, maybe we can win the goodwill of our neighbors. All right. With that, this is the second part of the lecture. So if any more doubts are there, please let me know. I think there are no more doubts as of now, and hope you guys are enjoying the lecture. So let me know if there are any doubts, or if, are you enjoying the lecture? Are we good? So let's proceed to the second part of the prominent institutions in South Asia. There are a lot of institutions, international institutions in South Asia, or regional groupings in South Asia and Southeast Asia. I'm talking about the prominent four. And at this point of time, I'm only giving you a brief overview. Once we complete our Asia series, that means I've discussed all the bilateral relationships in Southeast and South Asia. We will have an entire dedicated lecture to all the international organizations within this region and how they interact with India and other countries, so that we can see a comprehensive picture. Because these groupings are very, very important. They all result in closer economic and social cooperation. All right. In fact, not just economic and social, economic, social, and technological cooperation. All right. Now, let's start with the first one. SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. It has 8 member states: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, all these South Asian nations. Its headquarters are in Kathmandu, Nepal. Foundation year was in 1985. Indira Gandhi was one of the pioneers or founding mothers of the SAARC. You might tell me that, ma'am, she was assassinated in 1984. So the process of formation of SAARC started way before that. It started way off in 1983, and she was there when it happened. The organization promotes development of economic and regional integration. It's one of the most important bodies. BIMSTEC. So BIMSTEC is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economical Cooperation. BIMSTEC is also a very, very important regional organization. In fact, these two are the primary regional organizations in the South Asia, of which India is a part. There are 7 nation states: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. Please remember these member states. It's important, right? Because they are very, very close neighborhood. Dhaka, Bangladesh is the headquarters, and it was formed in 1997. All right. I will tell you how to actually remember these figures. Now, there are 14 main sectors of BIMSTEC where BIMSTEC countries actually contribute together. For example, trade, investment, energy, tourism, technology, agriculture. There are more others are there. We don't need to remember the entire list, but 14 main sectors at which BIMSTEC countries contribute towards each other. The third one is MGC, or Mekong Ganga Council. Can anyone tell me where is the Mekong River flows through? And there are 6 member states: India, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. These 3 actually occur together. They're very, very close neighbors. Vientiane, Laos is the headquarters, and the foundation year is 2000, right? That's during the year of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. They cooperate on 4 sectors: education, transportation, tourism, and culture. You can easily remember it. Then it is Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation. This is in the maritime region. There are 22 member states for the Indian Ocean region and 10 dialogue partners. The headquarters are in Ibn, Mauritius, and it was also formed in 1997. It's a regional forum. Tripartite in nature means there are three parties. Government is there, business is there, and academia is there. So remember this. It is very important to remember this for promoting cooperation and closer interaction amongst all these three parties. Now, there are few important observations that I want all my students to make here. Sorry, China to Thailand, what? No, it wouldn't bring us to anything. It wouldn't bring us to anything. I just mentioned that example, all right? And what do you mean by China to Thailand? Okay, here I want you to see some important things. First of all, if you observe, no regional organization has their headquarters in India. So we have done one good thing to allay the fears of our neighbors. We don't have any headquarters per se in India. We have let the smaller regional nations have those headquarters with them. Otherwise, we could have had them in New Delhi, but we don't have them there. We have it in different nations. First thing. Second thing, if you can see, BIMSTEC was formed in 1997. It's a combination of all the South Asian states, including a little bit more of Southeast Asia. That means it also includes Thailand, right? Uh, Actually, no. Mekong is in Mekong River. Actually, is a transboundary river between Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. See it on the map. It is a transboundary river between Vietnam and Laos, especially. All right. Okay. Now, and if you see here, Indian Ocean Rim for Association of Regional Cooperation, it was also formed in 1997. This was the period of our former Prime Minister I.K. Gujral, or our 12th Prime Minister I.K. Gujral. He had given the Gujral Doctrine. Along with it, I want to mention something here. His was the third phase of Indian foreign policy, that is 1991 to 1999, all right, when we had the Look East India policy, when India was trying to maintain its strategic autonomy. So the Look East policy, or to engage more with our eastern neighbors, was given during the time of Narasimha Rao and further carried on by I.K. Gujral, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Manmohan Singh. And now, during the time of Narendra Modi, that Look East policy has become Act East policy, about which we'll discuss tomorrow or maybe day after tomorrow, whenever the next session comes up. Now, that's why this date of 1997 is very important. This has been the time when we started looking at our eastern neighbors. All right, that's why I wanted to point this out. With that, I will close for today. Why I wanted you to study these prominent institutions in South Asia, so that we should know where are we engaging with our South Asian neighbors. Apart from bilaterally, what are the multilateral institutions? In fact, most of these institutions also provide for bilateral meetings. So whenever there is a SAARC meeting, India and Pakistan make it a point that they also have a summit level meeting, or they also have a separate bilateral meeting along the lines of SAARC. Whenever there's a BIMSTEC meeting, India plans to meet all its other neighbors on a one-on-one basis. All right, so all these forums are very, very important for having deep ties between the leaders. In fact, it is often said, foreign policy is not a matter of paper diplomacy. It's a matter of leader to leader relationship, the way Nehru had it, and the way, especially Prime Minister Modi is a very, very good example of it. He tries to build a personal relationship with each of the leaders that he meets, so that in times of need, in times of explaining our foreign policy, that comes in handy and we are able to secure our national interest. With that, I would like to conclude simply that whatever happens, wherever, whichever policy we see, whichever part of the geography we see, our entire edifice still remains the same. Our entire motive of having a foreign policy remains the same. That is this. The entire motive is to secure Indian interests. The entire objective still remains the same, that we have to secure our national interest through our Indian foreign policy maneuvers. With that, I would like to go back to this slide. All right, this one, and conclude my lecture here. So if you have any doubts, please post it in the live chat section. I will look at it. And other than that, that's for today. I will post the next session in which we'll be discussing the neighborhood first policy, the look east policy, and the act east policy. We'll combine all these three policies together because it's important that when we move further into the bilateral ties between each of these Southeast Asian nations and South Asian nations, we completely understand what are the policies that we follow so that it's easier to understand the bilateral relationships. All right. This is my Telegram group link for current affairs. You can directly interact with me here, or if you don't want to directly interact, you can simply join the Telegram channel link, which is given here. Okay. Here, both the places I post all my upcoming sessions so that you never lose out on any sessions from me. And also it gives you a chance to interact with your peer group because a lot of people who are regularly attending my lectures are already there. Okay. And I also share all my notes here on these channels. So all the best for your preparation. And I'm sure you have liked the video because I've put in a lot of hard work in all the videos that I take, in all the sessions that I teach. So please subscribe to our channel, share my videos with your friends so a lot of people can benefit. And I feel that I have done my part and I feel more enthusiastic about teaching a lot more number of people and reaching to a lot more number of people. And whenever you choose to engage with my science and technology course, a free lecture is already available on the portal, the Unacademy portal. You can see that lecture. And if you choose to subscribe to my course, use this code SBUS so that your 1 year fee becomes less than 40,000 and your 2 year fee becomes less than 58,000 or less than 29,000 per year. With that, I would like to close for today's session. Thank you and have a good day. And I'll just take one last doubt. We actually cannot prevent anybody from working in India. See, we are a part of a globalized nation and there's something called World Trade Organization that controls the trade between nations. So you cannot have unnecessary import conditions. You cannot block the trade from happening unless something you are in a war-like situation. So the World Trade Organization controls those relations. And imagine if Chinese blocks us out completely of their market, right? And if all the nations start doing that, then there'll be a complete chaos. So we are all bound, all the signatories of the WTO are bound by certain rules and regulations, and that's why we cannot do it. All right. With that, I'll close for today. Thank you and have a good day.